Hey, what's good, y'all? It's your boy George Michael Perez, aka G Mike. You already know what it is, baby. Those Bandoleros Fantasy Football League is in full effect and in the playoffs, baby. We come this week to show you the week 15 results and the week 16 matchups, which will be the second round of the playoffs. We see what happened in the first round of the playoffs. Very exciting. And we saw some upsets on Sunday night and Monday night that made some fantasy owners go into the second round and some get kicked out of the playoffs. Before we get into the video, follow me on my social media accounts: Twitter at George Mike Perez, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at GMikeMedia_. And if you haven't heard, I'm doing a podcast on sports. It's under the G Perspective on all podcast platforms and YouTube. So let's get into it. Los Bandoleros Fantasy Football League, baby. All right, so we only got 4 matchups this week. So we're going to go into the losing bracket and then we'll go into the winning bracket. First matchup is myself going up against George, aka Losing Hurts. And if you see the losing is still hurting for the fella. Looking at my team, got 5 players that went off just 10 or more points. Ryan Tannehill didn't really do much, so that was kind of a scare right there. But my running backs finally came together and did double dual threats. Derrick Henry, 26.30 fantasy points, and Dalvin Cook, 27 fantasy points. That's what really gave me over the hump right there. Looking at George's team, Christian McCaffrey always doing what he does: 108 rush yards, 1 rush TD, 6 receptions. And then Deontay Johnson finally having a game of the season: 10 receptions, 98 reception yards, 2 rush yards. But everyone else kind of shit the bed, especially Deshaun Watson: 161 pass yards, 1 pass TD, 22 rush yards. Not as good as we thought he was going to do. If I would have substituted Trevor Lawrence in for Ryan Tannehill, it would have gave me that much more an advantage of winning. If George would have put in Drake London in for one of his receivers, Devontae Adams, actually just Devontae Adams, it would have put him even closer to me. But no matter what he did, he was still going to get the L this week. 31.84 fantasy points on the bench for George, 43.82 fantasy points on the bench for me. George now is in the final round of the dresses. He will be going up against whoever loses next between Kevin and Gio. Me, I advance forward up in the standings. I am out of the dress contention, and now I am playing for just not being in the bottom of the rankings. The next matchup in the losing bracket is Gio, aka the rookie, with 93.40 fantasy points, going up against Kevin, 109.92 fantasy points. Kevin won this week. Looking at his team, James Conner and Aaron Jones doing work as his running back duo. Keenan Allen for the 3rd straight week in a row, putting up great fantasy points: 16.60, 86 reception yards, 8 receptions. Najee Harris on the flex, 14.60 fantasy points, 86 rush yards, 1 rush TD. Everyone else kind of did bad for Kevin, but it was enough to help him win this week. Looking at Gio's team, Joe Burrow doing work, Ezekiel Elliott doing work, Amon St. Brown doing work. But you got Michael Gallup only had 1 reception, 2 reception yards, which was the deal breaker for Gio, because if he would have at least put up 10 points, he probably would have won against Kevin. Looking at the benches, if Gio would have put in Noel Fannin for his tight end, Tunyon, which had 1 reception, 4 reception yards. Fant had 1 reception TD, 5 receptions, 32 reception yards. He probably would have won this week as well. And then for Kevin, if he started Zay Jones, 34.90 fantasy points, 3 reception TDs, 109 reception yards, 6 receptions. If he would have put him in for Amari Cooper, Kevin would have destroyed Gio. But he ended up still getting the win. 50.20 fantasy points on the bench for Kev, 39.10 fantasy points on the bench for Gio. Gio will play George for the battle of the dresses to who wears the dress in Wynwood. Kevin improves, and he is out of the dress contention. All right, since Adonis and Trick both have bye weeks in the playoff round, Steve will play against Jose. Jose lost to Steve 118.26 points. Steve 130.84 points. Before Sunday night, Jose had the lead and everyone thought Jose was going to win. But then Steve's team just popped off. 32.74 fantasy points for Patrick Mahomes, 336 pass yards, 2 pass TDs, 1 rush TD. Chris Godwin doing work, Jerry Jeudy doing work, and Rashad Stevenson doing work. But Michael Pittman Jr. finally doing something. 10 receptions, 60 reception yards, 30 rush yards, 19 fantasy points. Looking at Jose's team, Josh Allen always doing what he does, and Tyreek Hill, David Montgomery, 1 rush TD, 1 reception TD, 53 rush yards, 24.10 fantasy points. Did his thing, but Stephon Diggs shied away a little bit. Rashad White, and then Chris Olave as well. Not enough to get Jose over the slump. He will get kicked out of the playoffs. Looking at the bench though, if Jose would have substituted DeAndre Swift and for Rashad White, it would have put him a little bit closer, but not enough to beat Steve. Looking at Steve's team, he put Latavius Murray in, his running back for Jonathan Taylor, who got injured in the first half of the game against the Vikings. He would have won by so much more. No matter what Jose did, he was losing this week to Steve. Steve with 56.60 bench points, 50.34 bench points for Jose. Jose gets kicked out of the playoffs. Steve advances to the next round to face Adonis. The next playoff matchup, we got Ernie with 95.56 fantasy points going up against Johnny, aka Johnny Say Word, 129.66 fantasy points. Great week for Johnny. Looking at his team, Justin Jefferson going off, Dawson Knox with 21.80 fantasy points, 98 reception yards, 6 receptions, 1 reception TD. Nick Chubb really didn't do much, but 99 rush yards. If he would have had a TD, he probably would have had 15 points. Johnny's team did what they had to do. Ernie's team, Aaron Rodgers, kind of shit the bed, messed them up. But Miles Sanders only 2 fantasy points, 42 rush yards, 1 fumble loss, negative 13 reception yards. Wow, that really hurt Ernie on that one. Everyone else kind of did their thing, kind of did it. But that Miles Sanders really put Ernie down. No matter what, though, he was going to lose, even if you try to substitute A.J. Dillon. Yeah, if you would have put A.J. Dillon, he probably would have lost by like 5 points. A.J. Dillon had 2 rush TDs, 36 rush yards, 35 reception yards, 22.10 fantasy points. It would have put him closer and maybe would have made Johnny sweat a little bit, but 61.48 fantasy bench points for Ernie, 39.10 fantasy bench points for Johnny, aka Johnny Say Word. Ernie gets kicked out of the playoffs and Johnny advances to play tricky in the second round. All right, so we got the championship bracket. We got Steve going up against Adonis. Steve is projected to win 120.06. Adonis 113.03. Then we got Tricky going up against Johnny. Johnny is expected to win 126.51. Tricky 123.33. Then looking at the losers bracket, we got myself going up against Jawan. I'm projected to win that. Jose going up against Ernie. Jose's projected to win that. Fabi going up against Kev. Kevin's projected to win. And then George going up against Gio. George is projected to win. On the losing bracket, what we're trying to look at is George going up against Gio, aka the rookie, because whoever loses has to wear a dress to Winwood with a sign that says "I suck at fantasy football," and it's gonna be amazing. All right, so we got the second round of the playoffs underway this weekend. Steve, aka the reigning champ, has a chance to go back-to-back finals. Playing against Adonis, aka Crypto Wolf, he has a chance to return to the finals after the first year we did this fantasy football league. And we got Tricky maybe going to his first ever finals, and the same thing with Johnny and his first ever playoff appearance. So it's going to be exciting. It's going to be something to watch. Hopefully you guys stick in and keep watching. So follow me on my social medias at George Mike Perez on Twitter, GMikeMedia _ on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And then the podcast, if you haven't heard, I'm doing on sports, is under the G Perspective on all podcast platforms. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave some comments, talk your shit, and hopefully we'll see you back soon.